You look at Christian speculative fiction today, and you see lots of bad news, plagues, destruction, people dying, suffering, giant creatures, giant scorpions, horrifying, terrible things. Rightly so, the non-Christians in the world look at that sort of thing and say, oh, that's nasty. How can you people really look forward to something like that? Of course, a Christian, if they know what they're about, should then recover and say, oh, no. That's not the point. The point is that ushers in a great and grand and beautiful new age. A land of peace and prosperity like the world has never seen before. And then the non-Christian will nod sagely and say, okay, tell me about it. And the Christian will say, it's an age of peace and prosperity like the world has ever known. Okay, yeah, I got that. Tell me more. We will spend all of our energies and all of our mental and emotional energies imagining and speculating about this disastrous time, and practically nothing about the wonderful time that follows it. Well, I started thinking. I'm an engineer by trade, and one of the things that we do in engineering, if we're trying to figure out how something works, is we run a simulation. In the real world, simulations are hard to come by, especially, the destruction of the entire world as we know it. So the best way I could think of to really work through in my own head what this time would be like was to write a book. It's called Dauntless Homecoming. It's not about the high and mighty. It's not about the theory of the Christian Millennium, but the best way I could figure it is take a small group of people and plop them in the middle of this world, people from a time similar to our own, and plop them in the middle and let them figure it out. And while they're figuring it out, we'll go along with them and we'll figure it out too. So after writing that book and thinking through this, my picture of this time, this Christian millennium, has several characteristics, some of which probably will surprise you, but that's okay. Characteristic number one, I believe it will be a very technological time period. When Christians think of the millennium, they think in terms of sheep, horses with carts, people living in rustic villages with no running water, and so on and so forth. But here we are in the 21st century, and we're pretty technological. The longer the Lord waits to return, the more technological we're going to get. So that means that in this millennium, we're talking about spaceships, artificial intelligence, high-speed communications, potentially robotics. There's nothing inherently wrong with technology. It's just in how people use it. It used to be that people in science and technology, their attitude was, by understanding more about science and about the universe, we're understanding more about God. At some point, however, in the last few hundred years, science and religion have drawn apart, and they're taking sides and lobbing shots at each other instead of stopping and thinking about it. After all, when you think about it, if you really believe the Christian worldview, that Jesus was not this revolutionary peasant, but really the embodiment of the God who created the universe. The God who designed your brain and my brain. The God who invented the law of physics, who first thought of DNA. Then just think of what kind of advances in science we could have if, rather than trying to puzzle out how proteins work or why the folding of them matters in a certain way, you could just go ask. You can just go ask God or ask angels or ask somebody. I need you to explain to me how this enzyme pathway works, and find out. That certainly leads to a very technological, a very scientific age. But, however, we have to remember all of those things that Christians love to talk about. Things falling from the sky, yada yada yada, giant flames and death and disease and conquest and war and everything else. The world's going to be a broken place for a while. Most of the population of this earth is going to be gone. It's going to die through all the disasters and everything else. I didn't want to write a traditional Mad Max post-apocalyptic kind of story, so I set my story about 500 years later when things had recovered. The world is still a wild place with plenty of opportunities for adventure, plenty of unknown areas where there used to be things happening, but not anymore. Abandoned cities and ruins to be explored with their own mysteries. Maybe some errant technology that is holed up in some of these places. Some damage that we've done to the world. And upon that, you can build a pretty interesting story. As this little group that you've plunked down is now trying to make sense not only of the politics of the world, but also some of these unexplored or thinly explored areas. People, I think, will have a long lifespan. That's hinted at in Scripture. When we look at the very beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis, it describes people having lifetimes not in decades, but in centuries. And I can see in this millennial time a return to that, where you have people and you have characters that are 200 plus years old. Well, I started thinking, well, what does that mean that you have a 200-year-old? I think a 200-year-old is probably just getting into prime middle age. Because you look at, once again, at the beginning of the Bible, and you see what people who are 200 or 300 years old are doing, and it seems like they're in the prime of life. Believers in this age, Christians, are going to be in charge. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean reigning as petty little tyrants. I don't want to be a petty little tyrant. I don't think I'm a petty little tyrant as it is. I don't think God is grooming me to be a petty little tyrant. Jesus was not a petty little tyrant. Nothing in his life would indicate that he was a despot in the sense of a cruel human despot, or a cruel mortal despot, let's put it that way. So, what do? We're going to be running the place. So, I envision it more like shepherds. That we might be in charge of cities or towns. That our job is not to rule it with an iron hand, but rather to figure out how to grow and mature those cities and towns, and how to bring them to a closer relationship with God. I also see us living in heaven, but working down here. I don't know how we're commuting, but I see that hinted at in Scripture, once again. Another aspect I see of this period of time is evil restrained. Scripture talks about the devil being imprisoned for 1,000 years. We don't know exactly what that's like, because all of human history has been in a world where the devil has had free reign. The way I conceive of it, however, is, for example, a husband and wife are having an argument. And the argument escalates. And in the midst of that argument, there's a raspy little whisper. Let's pick on the man. In the man's ear, it says, "Go ahead and hit her. She deserves it. Hit her a bunch of times. Teach her a lesson." Where did that little voice come from? He wasn't even imagining that an hour ago. That's not something he's ever thought of doing. But there, out of the blue, comes this little voice in his ear that tells him to do something that's really, really evil. Well, I would think that that voice didn't come from him, but that's really the devil's minions, a demon, that is planting an idea in his head. In this time of the millennium, that's not going to happen. The devil's going to be locked up. All of his cohorts are going to be put away. So that, will people argue? Yeah, they're going to argue. Voices are going to rise. Scripture talks about there being penalties for disobedience, even in the millennium, which means people aren't going to be perfect. But they're not going to be as bad as they are now. It means they're going to be nicer people. So you're not going to have, certainly no murderers. And the only time people would really go over the edge like today is if one of these devil creatures happened to get out. Don't want to spoil my book too much, but yeah, just suppose maybe a little one got out and what kind of mischief it could cause. I hope that I have painted or started painting a picture in your head of what this time could be like. God has not put me on his speed dial. He has not slipped me any pieces of paper. I have not seen any trailers. I am not a prophet. But still, in thinking through reasonably, I don't think these are unreasonable expectations. And I think it should open the door to all of us, especially believers, that we could get past all of the disasters that usher in this age and start thinking, start dreaming, and start really sharing with others our hopes and our expectations for this time to come. Thanks for listening.